Everyone's having a wonderful day, and I'd like to say thank you all for joining us. It's so amazing to see so much community and so much response over this and other executive orders right now. I really can't express to you how much we at Advocacy Q Plus appreciate this and how much just the trans community and other marginalized communities appreciate this support and community that's forming right now. Thank you for the heart, Ruby. Okay, so while we wait on Representative Seth Ross, I'm going to go ahead and kind of give an outline of what today will look like. I'm going to run through opening disclaimer. I will briefly review the kind of engagement protocol for today, and then assess really quickly what Advocacy Q Plus's findings in regards to the biological and public safety data language that was included in the executive order, and then we will jump into questions. This first set should take less than 10 minutes tops. So I'm going to go ahead and move into the disclaimer. I, Rebecca Bishop, founder and president of Advocacy Q Plus, formally state that AQ Plus is a nonpartisan scientific research to action nonprofit. The aims of today's event do not express any political changes, actions, or outcomes. AQ Plus is using the recent executive order as a platform to discuss inconsistencies and inaccuracies within the EO's language, specifically where it claims its claims are incongruent with decades of peer-reviewed scientific research. Our goal today is to educate the public on these inaccuracies by presenting expert analysis on the biological reality of sex and gender, which exists within a spectrum rather than an immutable binary. Additionally, we will address public safety data that directly counters the executive order's claims. Please note that any personal opinions expressed by panelists do not reflect views or positions of Advocacy Q Plus as an organization directly. The protocol for how today will work. Panelists and moderators should remain muted when not speaking, as well as all participants. The panelist will use the raise hand function to indicate desire to respond or contribute to the discussion post. For audience and participation, you will not have access to microphone functions just for safety purposes within trolling to these events occasionally. The chat function will be open for respectful discussion and audience questions, so please do feel free to ask questions and participate in the chat. Just know that any non-productive discourse, aggression, or hate speech will result in immediate removal by the co-moderator, Alyssa Durham. The structure for the discussion today is we will go over Advocacy Q Plus's findings super quick, and then we will start out with some advocacy and legislative questions and conversations surrounding this executive order, and then move into the biological section. Our representative who should be attending with us today, Seth Rose, has a time crunch, so we're trying to be respectful to his time. So to move into, yay, wonderful. Representative Rose is here. I'm so sorry. I keep trying to say Ross for some reason. My words don't work so well sometimes. So to move into Advocacy Q Plus's findings, we were able to determine through rigorous evaluation of peer-reviewed scientific research that sex differentiation is not predetermined at conception in all species. There are varying evidence of temperature, sex-dependent changes that happen within other species, such as reptiles and turtles, that happens far post-conception, usually within the second third of the gestation of the egg. There is also socially influenced sequential hermaphroditism within varying, usually marine species located within reef biotic systems. And these are natural stages of these fishes' life cycles where they mature initially into assigned at birth male or assigned at birth female, and then throughout their life, dependent on specific social pressures, these fish will then naturally and biologically transition into the next sex. So for parrotfish, they start out assigned female at birth. When male populations get lower, they begin showing courtship behaviors to non-differentiated juveniles, and this leads to a neurological switch in their brain that then causes a follow-up of a morphological switch within their anatomy, and they transition fully into being male fish that can copulate fully within that sense. Clownfish are known to go the opposite. So they will begin as smaller males, and then when population loss to females occur, they will naturally transition into females. So this shows that sex is not immutable within all species. There are many different genetic and environmental factors that play roles in sex development in both humans and other species. This can be seen within the prevalence of intersex as a diverse spectrum of sex organ presentation within humans that results from many different genetic outcomes. As well, there is genetic evidence and neurological evidence and neurobiological evidence as well. So not just like neural response, but actual size differentiation within specific brain regions of the trans individual's brain when compared to their cisgender counterparts, showing that gender dysphoria has attachments to sexually dimorphic brain development patterns that are associated to estrogen and androgen insensitivities from a neurological standpoint. The public safety data that we were able to find is that the executive order claimed that trans women in particular posed extreme sex violence risks to cisgendered females, especially through the perpetration of their presence within those affirming gendered spaces. However, nationally and statewide, there is no evidence to support public safety risk from trans inclusive policies. The FBI findings found that the majority of perpetrators for sexual violence crimes were cisgendered males within power positions such as clergies, teachers, mentors, etc., whereas the 2018 fiscal report from the US Sentencing Committee found those exact percentages of sexual violent crimes within the cisgendered community to be 90, I believe it was 94.2%, no, 92.6%, I apologize, cisgendered males and 6.4% cisgendered females, and trans individuals within those sentencing statistics were found to be far under 1% of total sex-related crimes. A separate report through UCLA confirmed the lack of reporting of trans individuals in sex violent related offenses, and even further confirmed that trans individuals are 40% more likely to experience sexually related violence as the victim during their lifetime than are their cisgendered counterparts. To wrap this up really quick, we also looked into the executive order's claims against the Bostock versus Clayton County 2020 findings, which found under Title VII that there is adequate reason and claim for gender identity protections to the transgender community. And we also were able to determine that this executive order's language and lack of true claims directly contradicts the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, as well as violating ADA findings and establishments that acknowledge the true, that trans individuals are biologically found and that best practice medical care is the proper way to actually medically handle the trans population. With this, I'd like to now kind of jump into our panel discussion. We are going to jump right into some of the more like legal and legislative and public policy sides of this conversation in the interest of Seth's time. Um, so I kind of would like to start the conversation out talking about this Bostock versus Clayton County finding. The executive order dismisses the Supreme Court's ruling in Bostock versus Clayton County. Josh or Representative Seth, can either of you explain why this ruling is significant and how it protects transgender individuals under Title VII?
I will do my best and then let Representative Rose chime in with anything to add. And hey, y'all, my name is Josh Malkin. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the advocacy director for the ACLU of South Carolina. It's a really sad privilege to be with you all here today. I wish we didn't have to be here, but I'm glad to be here with you all. So I'm blanking on the year, but Bostock v. Clayton essentially said that under Title VII, which is the discrimination and employment part of the Civil Rights Act, sex included both sexual orientation and gender identity. So there couldn't be any sort of adverse employment decision based on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. I will say an executive order cannot override a Supreme Court decision. So there should not be this, I think our president is doing a lot of, he's not necessarily checking to see if what he's doing is allowed or constitutional. So hopefully employers are getting that messaging that they are still beholden to the holding of Bostock. Um, I'm blanking on the other parts of your question, Rebecca. I apologize.
Yes, there we go. Thank you, Alyssa. Um, I apologize. I had an interruption and I needed to mute myself briefly. Okay, so yeah, I was just kind of looking for a general explanation, and I think you did a fantastic job at just kind of the precedence that surrounds that finding. And it was 2020 was the year. Um, so I was just wanting everyone to kind of be caught up in this conversation for what did Bostock versus Clayton County find? What were the Title VII findings that substantiated the Supreme Court deciding in its favor? And I think we can kind of follow this up with, or Representative Seth Ross, is there, or Rose? I don't know why I keep doing
Oh,
that.
it's fine.
Is
It's fine.
there,
Yeah,
you
it's
would like
totally
to add
fine.
into this?
I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows that obviously we have a supermajority Republican House right now. Um, they have the ability to impose their will on the legislature on particular issues. Last year, we saw some legislation that we fought valiantly and did our best. And I was struck by how brave we had. A lot of people that came and spoke. And if I'm not mistaken, Rebecca, I think you also came and spoke. Um, and as I sat there and listened, I was really struck by the how brave the speakers were to come and confront this committee made that was pushing legislation that was meant to bully individuals. And so I was honored last year through my efforts and some of the things that I did and fought for to be selected as one of the legislative heroes by AFA. I drove down to Charleston to accept that award. I was so touched by it. But really, I try to be a legislator that understands that I don't, I'm not an expert in all things. And so I try to get my information from people that I trust and entities that I trust, people like Josh, the ACLU. And really, I wanted to log on to let you know that there are legislators that do care. There are people that are fighting. I don't want you to feel like our cause is without support. There are people at the South Carolina State House that are fighting every day and trying to make sure your voices are heard. And so that's really why it was so important for me to log on to let you know that there are elected officials that care, that hear you, and want to support and fight for you.
Goodness, thank you so much. Yes, Josh.
And Rebecca, I hate to take us away from questioning, but it's what us cis white men do is break all the rules set for us, right? So I just want to kind of like piggyback off what Representative Rose said. And Representative Rose was absolutely an ardent champion in the terrifying fight last year. It is super important for folks to meet with Democratic legislators because Democratic legislators, for the most part, lack the information, right? They have 900 bills in front of them. They are not experts in all of them, and they rely on organizations like us, but also impacted folks to kind of be like, here's my story, right? I met with a mental health counselor for 4 years. And then I started puberty blockers. And then I started hormone therapy, right? And the most ardent champions in the state house are the folks who have heard those stories, right? So it's not just the science because their side produces this junk science that they put out there as fact. So what I've seen make for really powerful legislative advocacy is making sure that our legislators hear the stories of those who are going to be harmed. And I would say like d Democrats are a safe space. They definitely need to be contacted. They definitely need to hear stories. At some point, we can kind of get more into the weeds about what needs to happen, what I think should happen with Republican legislators because they aren't not a monolith. So I think the way that constituents reach out to them does need to vary based on who the Republican legislator is. But just want to kind of echo Representative Rose's point. I think the most powerful advocacy we saw from legislators in South Carolina and across the country are those folks who are seeking out information and stories from their constituents, and then bringing that passion and that love to the state house floor. So yeah, I applaud Representative Rose. I wish there had been more folks who had gotten up like Representative Rose and fought the fight that he did. But I just will say, like, do not, I think there's assumption that all Democrats are going to be great. They're going to get up there and do these really great speeches. And unfortunately, that's not the reality. We did see, I thought, some pretty misinformed and maybe even harmful speech, well-meaning maybe, but harmful in effect speeches.
Yes, I definitely, I can certainly echo what you're saying, especially as a scientist watching the misuse of statistics and just the horrible low quality studies that end up getting put out that side ends up using to validate their claims, where when you know how to look for a proper source, when you know how to examine, okay, was this an appropriate experimental design or not, you can easily look into these studies and go, oh, there's no evidence or ground to any of your claims or findings in this. But it gets harder for the public to do that. Um, I kind of want to ask Dr. Paul to get you into the conversation. And then I want to jump back to kind of what you were saying, Josh, about how do we get community to better participate with legislators and better communicate. But first, I kind of want to jump in with Dr. Paul and go, kind of what are your insights to a broad audience, maybe, of how can we, as individuals that care about this issue, be certain that we're finding good source scientific information that we can tell to our legislators?
That's a great question. And I just introduced myself. I'm Dr. Kimberly Paul, and I'm working as a professor at Clemson University in the genetics and biochemistry department. So I'm a scientist and also a citizen and a human being. So I get asked that question a lot from students about what is a good source if they're writing a report. And I share the same advice with my friends and family who are not scientists. And I usually look for peer-reviewed research. Our government sponsors a website called PubMed, and you can go in there. Anybody can get access to PubMed and go in, and you can find articles, research articles written by scientists and doctors that about whatever topic you're interested in. And with the increase in advocacy for open source publications, you can, many of these articles are available for anybody to download and read. They're not siloed behind publisher fees where only people at universities could get access to. So there are a number of open access journals that any citizen can get access to. So I recommend peer-reviewed research. For medical information, I like to go to medical clinics like the Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, which is where I did my postdoctoral training, the Cleveland Clinic. These very prestigious and well-regarded medical clinics have very good information that is based on medicine and science about topics. So I would consider them trusted sources. And the other place would be medical associations. So physicians groups and medical associations will often have an official sort of professional position about a standard of care or an approach. And they are also, I would call them, very high quality, reputable research resources as well.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Um, if anyone doesn't have anything else to contribute to this, I will kind of pull that back into how we can use that to talk to our legislators. So, wait, I should allow no hands up. Okay, good. So, how can individuals and organizations like Advocacy Q Plus effectively counteract that harmful rhetoric surrounding this EO and other things that pull through legislation? Especially from Josh or Representative Seth, what would kind of your insights be of how do we best deliver that PubMed derived information that we're looking at as a community to these individuals so that they're most receptive to it?
Well, I think that there is strength in numbers. And what I mean by that is that I have noticed that if you are a constituent of someone, and the more an elected official hears from constituents, the more you're going to get their attention. And so I think if you email or you contact or you call their legislative office and you let them know that you're a constituent, as they hear from constituents, they're going to be more responsive. And so it's like for me, when I have my state house email account, we get a ton of emails and so too many to respond to, but I make sure as I go through, if it's a constituent, that I respond directly because we're getting a lot of mass emails. And so for me, I think if there was a coordinated effort to kind of, if we went district by district and had organization to say, here are constituents of this elected official who care about this issue, I think as you organize that, you have the best chance to get their attention. And so for me, to the extent that you can identify across the state individuals who feel like-minded as to legislation and bad legislation and things that need to be fixed, the more constituents of an elected official that you can get to that person, the more likely you're going to get their attention. It's, I see it countless times. And but to me, organizing is a good way to counter that, but also giving misinformation. When I go in and I know that I want to fight legislation, it's helpful for me to have the facts because the other side doesn't care about the facts. They like to act as if issues are a major pervasive issue, but you might, as you get the data, look and say, we're actually talking about 0.1% of the population. And we have all these issues throughout the state. We have public education that's failing us. We have children who are dying in the state care, potholes that we're hitting, all these different things that can improve the quality of life. But we spend our time debating an issue that by the numbers is 1% of South Carolina's population. Why are we spending our time and efforts, taxpayer money, for everybody to drive to Columbia, stay in a hotel? And so that's the other thing, is knowing that we have a super majority with Republicans, to the point that they now have different factions in the Republican Party. We have the Freedom Caucus and other things where they've gotten so big that they have infighting. What talking points will hit Republican issues? For example, we're coming to the state house. We have all these issues that we need to address, but this is what we are spending our time on. This is what, when we have legislators driving in from Myrtle Beach and they're staying in hotels and all these things for us to convene, and we have limited time at the General Assembly, this is what we are prioritizing with all these other issues. So I think organizing and also our messaging and knowing who we're trying to message to makes a difference.
Yeah, and I'll kind of reiterate my last point, thinking about the role of science in these conversations. I don't think the conversation between constituents and legislators should start with or even include science. I think the reality is a lot of our legislators probably have never sat down and just had a real conversation with a member of the community, right? So I would, advocate that the conversation just be like, hey, here's who I am. I have two kids in, a school district in your district. These are things I like doing. And then I would suggest like having a one pager that you can give to them with some of the key scientific medical facts, letting them know how they can contact you afterwards. Because I mean, y'all are the experts. Like Rebecca, you're giving information I've never heard that's like, 8 levels above my head. But if you hand them a piece of paper with that information, the sources and your contact information so that they can reach out to you as, the medical scientific experts that you are, in addition to, having lived experience, I would argue that's how science should be used. It's the human aspect first, the scientific aspect, second, and as legislators request it. I'd also say, and this is something I'll say the advocacy organizations need to, I blame myself for this, when there is competing science, having folks who are in the scientific community kind of have those points to refute it so that we can hand it to legislators or legislators get it directly, right? So when someone's up at the Senate podium talking about the CAS report, we can have someone say, actually, this is why this is debunked. Actually, this is why this is debunked. So having folks who are in the scientific and medical community, I know that work gets done, but making sure there's a pipeline of messengers to ensure that our champions like Representative Rose have that information and can use it on the floor would be hugely helpful, because I don't want the CAS report being left, uneviscerated if it's being used in a legislative debate.
Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you both so much. Um, and because I can speak from personal experience, Josh, especially about something you were saying about they, that kind of goes back in again to where they're using these debunkable nonsense data points to argue their claims. And I know I saw Senator Cash from Anderson last year over H4624 completely terribly misrepresenting statistics in regards to detransition statistics in the community. And the way he used those numbers were completely out of context to actual population size. He reported them in a way that made them sound incredibly more alarming than they actually are. Whereas, like, the statistic he was talking about was, roughly 10 people across the whole state. But he's like, oh, he made it seem like such a larger percentage of this kind of detransitioning was happening because of the way he reported that overall statistic. So I kind of want to follow up with both you, Josh, and Representative Seth in regards to, because I also saw this come through in the chat just a second ago too, if Advocacy Q Plus has like templates for people to use to contact their legislators. Um, would an organization like ours, AQ Plus, having a section on our site that goes, these are your Democratic representatives that have known statements within certain types of policies and viewpoints. And these are even the Republicans that are known to say they're in favor of LGBTQIA plus policy and diversity, equity, and inclusion. If AQ Plus maintained that list of those individuals, a list of talking points, reputations, like you were saying, would that be something that would be beneficial, as well as like the links to how to contact your representative? I know those are easily accessible once you know what those links are, but there's a lot of that that's kind of missing within common knowledge to the community as well.
I was going to pivot us, Rep Rose. So if you want to take that one on, I want to make sure I ask you a specific question before you have to hop to your family obligation.
Oh, I mean, Rebecca, the question essentially was the best route to contact or decipher who's who in the legislature.
Yes, and whether it would be helpful for a third party entity such as Advocacy Q Plus to maintain that as information on our website that we keep
Oh,
readily
yeah,
compiled and available.
absolutely. Absolutely. I think, for example, when I was in local government, if there was the library, the Richland County Library, which is nationally recognized, does a great job. They had a group called the Friends of the Library. And if there was an initiative, there was a council person that was trying to cut the budget of the library, or there was some initiative that was not going as they had hoped, you would open up your council email and the Friends of the Library would just flood you with emails. And you would be getting phone calls from constituents. My point is that they were very organized. They had this group that were supporters, and when they had a call to action, you knew it. And so I think organizing, knowing where we have our supporters throughout this state, who they vote for, is very important. And so, yes, they need to know how to contact individuals. And I think as an organization, we need to know where our supporters are, where they live, and how many numbers we have to go at a certain elected official who we think needs to be more open-minded on an issue or needs to speak up for our cause. And that's something, honestly, that I have learned as I've gotten into the legislature, is that it's not always just about the votes. When you see legislation meant to mislead and bully a segment of our South Carolina, residents that are being bullied by legislation, I have come to realize that it is very important, even when the numbers aren't there, that these individuals know they have support and a voice, that you just simply don't let legislation roll through. And that's something that I have matured. When I first got in, I was always looking at where are the votes on the committee and how, but there's more than that. It's speaking out so people know that there are people that care. And that is something that I have learned in this last 2 years. And when people do step up and speak out, I think it's important for our calls or any calls that they hear that their words made a difference. And so I guess the short of it in answering your question is yes, I think we need to be organized. We need to know what voters are out there that support our cause. We need to identify them, where they live, and they also need to have the information as to who their elected officials are. And I'm telling you, when there are elections through volunteers, door knocking, you name it, there must be a fear that if they continue to speak out against our calls, whether they are successful in their election or not, there's going to be a reckoning and an effort to have them voted out. And that's something that I see on other issues. I'm just going to say it. I feel like for me, for example, I spoke out against where I spoke for the need for us to have gun safety legislation. I can tell you that I heard from Republicans who shared with me when they supported something like background checks. The NRA, not wanting that legislation for background checks, when they would help find a candidate to get into the Republican primary and then send out mailers with misinformation that this elected official was trying to take their guns. He said, my neighbor would come to me. I'm not going to say his name. My neighbors would come to me and say, are you trying to take our guns? He's like, no, actually, I support background checks. And they're like, well, so do we. And so my point is that we also need to have more of a push and a reckoning, because these individuals are afraid to go against the NRA because they are afraid of the repercussions during an election cycle. And we certainly want to be more honest and forthright with our facts, but there still needs to be a reckoning that if you continue to bully us and spread misinformation, whether we're victorious or not, we're coming on election when it's election season. And so I think the organization is not just of people that support our cause, is not just about contacting these representatives and our elected officials when legislation's coming through the House, but it's also like, it's election time. This person has continually stuck it to us, and I want them to know that we're going to have 50 volunteers that are going to be helping out this campaign, making calls. And it doesn't even have to be about this issue. It could be, did you know he voted against X, and be smart and calculated about the issues that matter and that can hurt them. And so, but I think organizing is twofold, not only to be able to do the advocacy at the State House, but also that you can have a reckoning during election season if they continue to do and say the things they're doing against our cause. Sorry, I know it was long-winded, but
It was wonderful, though.
Good.
I want to make sure that the Republicans in our state house are not always eager to talk to me, and Representative Rose has much more experience with them. But I do. Democratic legislators need to meet with constituents to further their understanding. But as Representative Rose mentioned, the Republican Party is not a monolith, right? So you have the establishment Republicans who have a majority, and then you have the 18 or 20 folks in the House who make up the Freedom Caucus. They are extremists. Their whole agenda is really punching down at folks from marginalized communities. So this is where I want Rep. Rose to check me. I think the overwhelming majority of establishment Republicans will be safe spaces. I don't want to, you should absolutely check in with me or another advocacy organization to check before you have a meeting. You should never go in alone. You should go in as groups with allies as well. But the overwhelming, I would say the majority of establishment Republicans need to have those same meetings. Here I am, I'm your constituent, 3 kids in school, I'm a soccer mom, right? That kind of conversation, again, leaving behind the science. Republicans need to be hearing it as well. Then there are folks, and these are Freedom Caucus folks, I would never send someone from the community into those rooms. Just wouldn't do it. Those are, I would say, like, de facto, not safe spaces, right? Those guys potentially doxing, potentially retaliating. These are really dangerous people. That being said, I don't want them to be able to say, I didn't hear from anyone. So this is where allies come into the conversation, right? Who are our allies in the community who are also constituents who can go in to some of these, really hateful people and say, hey, this is I know someone who's trans, and let me tell you about how, transition works. Let me tell you about how mental health care comes first, and then how puberty blockers and hormone therapy, right? And you're not changing their vote, right? You're not maybe even changing but maybe you're changing their mind a little bit, right? So I just want Representative Rose, before he hops off, to speak to that. If check me. And again, the Republican establishment is not a monolith either, right? So please check in with somebody before you have any conversation with a Republican, because there are establishment Republicans that probably aren't safe spaces either. But I would just love to get Representative Rose's thoughts on that.
Well, I agree that, I mean, sometimes I hear a lot of times there are Republicans who are not in the Freedom Caucus and otherwise that are voting on legislation that the Freedom Caucus is forcing them to take up. It's not that they necessarily want to be able to take it, so I take it up. And so I agree that, Josh brings up a great point. Those aren't safe rooms to go into, but still, emails and other type of contacts would be fine, but those aren't safe rooms to go into when you're talking about um, those individuals on this particular issue. Um, I do think that, again, there are a lot of Republicans in leadership who are not extremists and they don't want to spend time on these issues, but they're being forced to by the Freedom Caucus, who quite honestly wants to pander and create crises that don't exist so that they can have talking points, like national talking points, during election time. And so again, when you're talking to a Republican, I think having facts about why are we spending our precious legislative time on an issue that is really a non-issue by the numbers, and they create crises like we've seen with NCAA athletics. When you see that someone come out and speak and say this is really essentially a non-issue out of the tens of thousands of athletes we have, you're talking about a single digit that it's just a non-issue, but we should be talking about real issues. And so again, I think it's really important to organize and know where your supporters are throughout the state and to be able to communicate directly to them quickly. And I use the library as an example. And so to identify where our support is in the state, where our individuals, and if we have some type of demonstration at the State House to have a good showing, and really the frameworks there from other organizations like with public school teachers and all these other issues, they are organized, they know when their supporters are, they have calls to action. Um, but really, to be honest, as this legislation comes through, I try to defer to people like Josh and ACLU and the experts to say, okay, what's the data? What are the talking points? What can I say that is truthful as to why this is such bad legislation? And that's where I try to get my talking points from, as we're trying to combat these things. And really, again, I'm by no means an expert on this, but I'm always willing to get the data to help push back on these initiatives. And the biggest reason I wanted to log on today was to let you know that there are people within the walls of the State House that care.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you. Dr. Paul.
Yes. Just for both you, Representative Rose, and for you, Josh, scientists are very good at rapidly finding data and facts to dig through something. We're really, really good at that. And so if you are facing something, call a scientist. And just universities are small places. Even a big place like Clemson is a small place. So if you are like, there's this environmental thing coming through, you can call me and I can rapidly track down who's the environmentalist, who's the, because I have friends, we have friends across disciplines. We know, everybody in our departments and across departments. So I could find you an expert pretty quickly. And so I would definitely encourage both of you, don't spend that time. I mean, I talked about resources, but don't spend that time digging through that stuff yourself or having a staffer do it. Just find a scientist. And I mean, in a work of a half an hour or an hour at most, we could probably give you 3, 4 talking points, especially if you say, I need 3 or 4 talking points about this. We're really, really good at that. We do it to each other all the time. That's how science, progresses. We're always poking holes in everybody else's theories. So that's a skill that we're very good and very fast at. So I just want to put that out there. Go ahead. Don't be afraid to call your scientists.
Well, and on that note,
We have 3 great institutions with big research institutions in the state, and people from any one of them would probably be very happy to help you.
I have a follow-up for that, but I know Rep Rose, I don't want you to have an angry daughter. So thank you so much for hopping on.
Yeah, guys, thank you so much. I'm going to my daughter's basketball game. I'll see you all later. Thank you. Contact me anytime. And please know that you have my support. And there are a lot of other people in the State House that are supportive as well. So thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Thanks,
Bye, guys.
Dr. Paul, to that point, I mean, we know what transphobic legislation is at the State House right now, right? And I even heard Rebecca mentioning like, the arguments for forcing folks into non-affirming bathrooms, locker rooms, and they're talking about like how dangerous it is, right? It sounds like those stats are out there, right? If those stats are out there and they can already be collected and we can be preemptive, that's great. We shouldn't be waiting until, floor fights when things are already determined. It'd be great to have that info already and just get it into legislators' hands. So that'd be amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Paul.
I was just going to follow up on that. If you can nip it in the bud early, it may lose its steam before it ever gets to the floor. So
Yeah,
if you just say, look, this isn't even going to fly. So let's focus on, bringing more business to the state.
right.
And this is a big thing that we at Advocacy Q Plus want to help institute and bridge that gap of getting that information out there on our sites, on our mediums with which we disseminate information so that constituents and individuals like you, Josh, at the ACLU of South Carolina, can already kind of have that information compiled together without having to do a bunch of digging. You can go, oh, AQ Plus is a reputable site for having this stuff compiled. Let me jump over and see if they have any evidence on this. We're trying to implement protocols now after this EO to where we're always trying to be like in immediate response and a little bit ahead of these issues. So we're using this as a chance to kind of build ourselves and identify, okay, this is something we need to add to our repertoire of information we keep on our sites. With that kind of being said, before we run out of too much time, I kind of want to pivot back into some of the biology and get some more insight from Dr. Paul as well. I want to kind of jump back into kind of the intersex and transgender and gender dysphoria presentation within humans. So I was kind of wondering, Dr. Paul, what do you think? How do I yes, Alyssa, can we unmute Dr. Paul? I'd love to hear from you about your thoughts on sex plasticity within humans in the animal kingdom, how that presents as intersex, and what you know of that.
Okay, so I'm going to focus on humans just for the sake of time. Essentially, we think that there's a binary, but everything in biology generally runs around a spectrum. So just as a accessible example, you can think of people who are very extroverted and people who are very introverted. And there's people in between, right? So actually with sex, that's also the same thing. And really at conception, where sperm meets egg, there is no the only level of sex determination, let's say, is really chromosomal sex. So you can have, most people know you have, if you're female, you have 2 X's, and if you're male, you have an XY. However, there can be some chromosomal events that happen during the formation of an egg or a sperm, where you can get a little bit of the Y chromosome attached to an X chromosome. So there can be some things happening at the chromosomal sex level. And so when a baby is gestating, there's a period of time where no sex differentiation at all. And it doesn't really start until about 6 to 7 weeks in the process of development, that the Y chromosome would start expressing a gene that will turn on the male development program. And so at conception, up until about 6 or 7 weeks, I think the phrase I like best is the tissues are indifferent. So they could go female or male up to that point. But then the Y chromosome gene is called SRY. It starts expressing, and that's a master regulator for starting the whole program for development into a male. And at that point, then the testes will start, the tissues that become the testes will start developing. Now, if there is no SRY, i.e., you are XX, so if you don't have a Y chromosome, then nothing happens until about 9 weeks. And then in the absence of that signal, the tissues that become the ovaries will start developing. So it's actually separated in time. So only at that point, several weeks into development in the womb, is there any kind of beginning to sexual differentiation. So the language in the executive order is actually puzzling, because it says at conception there's a determination of sex, and really the only thing that it's telling you is chromosomes. But in addition to SRY, there are over 70 genes that are involved in the sexual differentiation process. And with 70 genes going on, there's a lot that can happen. And so even if you have a chromosomal XXXY, you can have variations in the process of that development, which can lead to what is called a state of intersex, where and intersex is a really broad term. So it could mean you are neither male nor female in terms of your external genitalia. Usually people who are born intersex are assigned a sex at birth, but it could be different. I lost my train of thought. Hi, Sue. Somebody sent me a message. So the intersex could be at the level of external genitalia, but it could also be at the level of neurological patterning. So during development in the womb, the brain is exposed, and the developing brain, which starts probably at the time that either the testes or the ovaries start developing, there's hormone exposure, and the hormones can then help pattern the brain. In addition, there are hormones from the mom as well. So there's an interaction of maternal hormones, fetal hormones, and gene variation. So all of that can actually create a variety of outcomes in terms of the sex that your body looks like and the sex that your brain feels. And so that I think is a broader definition of intersex, where you're sort of in between. You're not strictly where the body and the brain match on one side as female and body and brain match as on one side as male. Um, and back to the chromosome idea, circling back around to that, there are also conditions where you don't have just XX or just XY. You can have XXY, you can have XYY, you can also have a little piece of Y hopping onto the X chromosome. So there are a variety of chromosomal variations that can also lead to maybe not even overtly intersex. There are some of the conditions, for example, XYY, which is Jacob's syndrome. People could live their whole life and be completely unaware of that. Klinefelters, they could be unaware of that through childhood until the onset of puberty, and then when the external male genitalia fails to develop normally, then there's a clue that there's maybe an issue. So there's a wide variety of expressions of sexual differentiation and sexual development. So the whole point of trying to put people into two separate boxes, many people will fit into those boxes neatly, but there are a lot of people who will not fit into those boxes for no other reason than their innate biology. So I think I will leave it at that. If there are further questions, I
Yeah,
don't
no,
want to take up
that's
too much
perfect.
time.
I think I will follow up just a tiny bit off of what you said, and
Yeah.
then we'll see if the chat has any last questions before we kind of do the review of, okay, so what did we get out of this and how do we move forward? So, yeah, to kind of talk just a second more about what you were saying with Klinefelter, for instance, and how intersex can have so much broad phenotypic, which is a term geneticists and scientists use to describe the physical trait of something that we can observe or a behavior that we can observe. So some of these individuals with Klinefelter, the only abnormality, so to say, that they see from this condition is just baseline infertility. They see hypertrophy of gonadal tissue, so their testes never fully develop, but otherwise, as far as they know, they're just a normal assigned male at birth going about their life going, oh, I wonder why I can't have kids. And it's like, you're actually partially intersex and you had no idea. And so this idea that, like you're saying, that sex can just be defined and put into a box is so dramatically inaccurate, in all honesty, when you have estimates of it was Klinefelter or androgen sensitivity, but being underdiagnosed by 64%. And so that means like the intersex population is larger than we think. The presentation of these conditions is far more ranging within spectrum than we think, to the point that they can blend and hide for the rest of our lives. And I mean, I know even just from a personal standpoint, as a trans woman, I've always wondered, like, I wonder what would happen if I was karyotyped. I wonder what would happen if I was genotyped. I wonder, like, what if I am one of these different variances with intersex where it goes beyond just like sexual determination and my brain went female during development, but it's actually like, oh, it turns out you're XX and you just have all the Y chromosome on one of your X chromosomes that got expressed. And so you just never knew, because these things happen. But with that, that kind of like wraps up our biology section. I wish we had more time, but I don't want to like
It's a
draw out
lot.
everyone's morning and afternoon. There's so many interesting avenues, especially the scientific side of this conversation could go. So I want to kind of pull into, oh, wait, no, I want to see if anyone has questions from the audience real quick, and then I'll do closing statements. No, Josh, you're perfect. That is honestly, I think, what we needed more out of this conversation. Cool. It looks like we're just getting yays and thank yous. So wonderful. So for closing statements, I kind of want to just go through what our key takeaways are. Our key takeaways are that scientific research contradicts the executive order's biological claims through and through. Legal precedence does protect gender identity under federal law, and that should be upheld. As well, public safety concerns used to justify restrictive policies are found to be completely unfounded. The actionable next steps for the participants, to everyone that was so wonderful, incredible to show up here today and spend this time with us. Stay informed. Please follow Advocacy Q Plus and our research. Keep in touch with our pages and our social medias as we update new things being posted to our websites, new findings around our research projects. Engage your policymakers, which was expressed so avidly today. Contact legislators and challenge their misinformation. And in an interest to help with this, Advocacy Q Plus is going to shift some of our attention into getting that information more adequately established on our website so that everyone has easy access to that. And then support affected communities, much like you are all doing here today. Amplify facts, have local discussions, attend events where you can learn more yourself. These are powerful tools that go so much further than we all think they do, especially when we start contacting and having these discussions with our legislators. And finally, for upcoming events and engagement opportunities, we will have future webinars and community organizing efforts. We intend to follow this webinar up with community-based grassroots efforts to help with contacting legislators and help further disseminate this information from today. And we would love to have anyone willing to volunteer, become involved, and help us conduct these activities as well. Having just individuals, when we're having community sessions for our grassroots building, help us kind of mediate and manage certain aspects even goes a long way. Sitting at a booth, handing out pamphlets, things like that. So as a final follow-up, everyone that registered and attended today will receive a summary of the key findings from today's webinar via email, as well as a recording of this webinar. We will also publish highlights of the discussion on our website and our social medias. And any interested participants can sign up for our newsletters to stay in touch with our future research updates and advocacy efforts. And with that, I just want to thank all you incredible humans for being here. Every single one of you in the participation audience side of this, I can't tell you how much it means to me to see every one of you here. And to our panelists also, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day, caring about these issues, and being such incredible allies here as we move through these days right now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. I hope you have a great rest of your Saturday. It's Saturday, right? That's what day it is.
Well, with that, I would like to echo Alyssa and say, everyone have a happy Saturday. We love you all so much, and thank you for being here. Bye.
Bye-bye.